Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this very special session on writing perfect papers. So this is a talk that I have been given for the past about 10 years. In the past, I had the first time given this talk about 10 years ago, and then different versions of this talk I have given quite a few times over the past 10 years. And today, what I prefer to do is I prefer to kind of combine what I've talked about in the past 10 years and try to refresh the content a little bit so that I can sort of give it a tune-up and make sure that everybody can get some fresh material, even if you have previously attended my talk. And that's exactly the kind of the intent of today's talk. So this is going to be a long talk today, and it's going to be titled Writing Perfect Papers. But of course, just like the abstract of today's talk, you know, there are no perfect papers. Perfect papers, they don't even exist in the world. So this is something that I believe that you really cannot achieve. This is just a target that you cannot achieve. They don't even exist. However, we still want to try our best today. And if we cannot write the perfect paper, maybe we can write some good papers. And if we write some good papers, probably we can write them quickly, probably within a certain time constraint. So these are the two subject topics that we would like to discuss today. First of all, for the majority of today's talk, I'm going to talk about how do we write a perfect paper. Or if we cannot really get to a perfect paper, maybe something that is as good as we can make it to be. And in the second portion of the talk, I would like to talk about how do we write probably not perfect papers, something good, but fast. Can we actually do it within the time constraint? So just to summarize the two portions of today's talk, our objective today is to write perfect papers, and that means improving the skills, and also writing good papers fast, and that means we would like to improve the process. So today we would like to improve both the skills of writing papers and also the process of writing papers. So let's get started. Let's first talk about writing perfect papers. So we would like to take a top-down approach. I would like to get started from the big picture, you know, the kind of the 30,000 feet kind of a bird's eye view of what we would like to do when we write papers, all the way down a little bit, you know, a few levels down, we're going to get to the tiny little bit of a detail. We're going to talk about all of that in this first section of today's talk. Just to break up the content today, I would like to talk about 4 different things. I would like to talk about the story of writing perfect papers, which is sort of like the high-level idea. How do we actually get to the high-level idea? What do these ideas consist of? And secondly, we would like to talk about the hard work. How do we actually work towards writing a perfect paper? And in the third section of today's talk, I would like to talk about the art of writing perfect papers. So this is where we kind of have already started to work hard towards this, and we would like to fine-tune sort of the writing process of getting the perfect paper. And then the fine granularity detail. All of the tiny little detail we'd like to tune, you know, that's kind of the bottom layer of writing perfect papers. We would like to talk about all 4 of these today. And in terms of time allocation, we will not be allocating time equally. So for some of these sections, we're going to spend a little bit less time. Some of the others, we will have running examples. We will spend a little bit more time here. So let's get started. Let's talk about the story. Now, just like making a movie, how do we actually try to make a great movie? Well, to make a great movie, we would like to, try to have a storyboard. So a storyboard is very important when we make a movie. and we would like to start from a storyboard, probably we're going to have to start from a good story, probably a powerful story, probably a convincing story or emotional story, something that is good. There are many other examples that we're going to have to start from a good story or a good design. For example, if we want to make a mobile app, which is a completely different category as compared to making a movie, we would also like to start from a tasteful design. So a tasteful design is something that is very important. So that would be the same when we would like to get started writing papers. There are 3 essential elements of a great story in a research paper. So the question is, what are these 3 essential elements that we would like to introduce today? Now, the first element, probably, I'm just guessing, my solution. The second one, probably my mathematical proofs. The third one, probably my simulation results. Of course, my paper will have to have a solution, my paper will have to have some theoretical proofs, and my paper will also have to have probably some simulation or experimental results. So are these the 3 essential elements of a great story? Well, not really. So what we wanted to, try to show is not like I'm very smart, I'm smarter than you think, or the thing actually works. These are not really what we wanted to show in our great story. So we want to get started from the real 3 essential elements of our story in the paper. So we're not going to, put in the solution and get started from the simulation results and so on. We're not trying to show the theoretical prowess of our, kind of team in this particular paper. This is not really the best place to show that. So we want to show how we have advanced the state of the art. And how do we actually show how we advanced the state of the art? Well, we will have to get started from the problem. So the problem is extremely important. We have to make it crystal clear. Exactly, if we have a solution, what are we solving? What is the problem that we're solving? So there are many papers that actually get started from the solution. And they said, oh, here's my great solution. But after reading probably even the first 2 pages of the paper, we still don't know exactly what is the problem that solution would like to solve. So that is the very first essential element in a good paper. The second essential element would be the originality of your proposed work. And in colloquial terms, what's new? So that's something that's very important. What's really new in your contribution as compared to related work? And the third is, how is your contribution better than the state of the art in the related work? In other words, how did you advance the state of the art when we talk about the actual solutions in your paper? So let's get started from the problem. So of course, there are many questions about how do we get to know what is the problem that we wish to solve? And many people, they're kind of getting started from something probably trendy, like AlphaGo or something like that. That's trendy enough. That involves, deep reinforcement learning. That's something that we might want to put into our paper. Well, that's a good idea. That's a good starting point, but it doesn't have to be something trendy. So it really has to be something that you really enjoy working on, because you're going to spend a huge amount of time working on this particular paper. So if you don't start from something that you enjoy working on, instead working on something that other people may enjoy working on, but you don't, something trendy, you may not really like the entire process of writing this paper. So the trend, on the other hand, may not even last forever or even for a very long time, for many years. For example, here's an example here. We have previously a trendy topic called P2P, peer-to-peer. And let's try to do a Google search of this particular term, peer-to-peer, in the paper title. So in the paper title, we can do a Google Scholar search, and here's what we observed. Starting from 2000 all the way to about 2008 and 2009, we reached a peak. It goes down, and then probably goes back up a little bit, and then it goes down towards right now. So if we were to start, around 2004, 2005 timeframe, that's perfect timing. That's good timing, of course, because it's already going up, and it's going to continue to go up. But if we go and try to do something related to P2P in about 2011, 2012, we're not sure. It might be a good timing, probably not. It depends. It depends on, are we going to go back up? Maybe we're going to go get back up. For example, machine learning is something that has been pretty hot in the 1980s and even the very early 1990s. But towards the middle 1990s, it goes down, and right now it goes back up. So really, it's hard to tell. But if we were to do it like in the past several years, probably it's going to be pretty poor timing. So it's not really good timing. So timing, you can never get right. So if you follow the trend, you really don't know when will it happen, when the trend will go down. So we want to follow the trend, but following the trend have another negative, sort of like a side effect. It may have incremental results, which means that it's going to be just slightly better than the previous paper, which is okay. It's okay for a paper, but it's going to be a little bit less exciting, and it's going to be a little bit less important. So what we wanted to do is to avoid that kind of being too incremental. We want to have something a little bit more substantial than having just very slight improvements, very incremental results. So we want to probably be a contrarian. And in English, if you look up an English dictionary, this means someone who is working against the trend. And when someone is working on a very hot, trendy topic, I'm going to work on something that is not that trendy. So that's kind of working against the trend. For example, in the recent paper, about 4 years ago, in 2017, there was a paper published by Google titled BBR, Congestion-Based Congestion Control. This paper actually worked on a very old topic. It's not trendy at all. It's actually working on congestion control. But it actually brought congestion control in the general case over a wide area in the internet back to the spotlight. So after this paper, there are more papers published on this particular topic. It's becoming a little bit more trendy going to right now. So at that time, not 2017, probably, it's not a good idea to work on congestion control, but really, it is not a bad idea either. We actually are working against the trend. It actually had a major impact going forward. So this is something that is really important. Be a contrarian and work against the trend. That might be a very good idea. So that's about it for talking about the problem, because what we really want to do is to work on something that we enjoy. If we enjoy working on a trendy topic, that's fine. If we don't enjoy working on a trendy topic, that's fine as well. Just be a contrarian, just firmly believe in what we would like to work on. So the second element would be what's new. What might be the original idea? Now, when we talk about what's new, we are comparing with related work. We're talking about the context of what is already done in the related work. What might be sort of like a state of the art in the related work? What's new in your work as compared to related work? So we want to first, in our paper, briefly introduce what is indeed the state of the art in the literature. So we want to solve probably exactly the same problem as that state-of-the-art paper is solving, and probably we have a better way of solving that problem. So that's something that we want to introduce. What is that particular state-of-the-art paper that we have? So now we want to write about what is new in my work as compared to the best work in the literature. So we cannot just talk about what they did. We also wanted to talk about what we did. in our new solution as compared to related work?
流入马上关上麦。
So talk about what's new in your work. That's very important. If this particular problem that you have tried to solve is just slightly different from the previous work, if it's probably having a different assumption, for example, this is something that might be just not exactly the same problem as the previous paper. That might happen. If that is the case, you probably cannot directly compare with the state of the art because the problem is slightly different. If that's okay, if that's the case, that's okay. All you need to do is to provide sufficient justifications on why your slightly different problem is really important. Probably it is more practical as compared to the state of the art and really necessary. Probably this is something that is very important theoretically as well. So if this is slightly different from previous work, maybe this is this is the first paper talking about solving this particular problem. And if it's really important, try to justify that. The third essential element would be, how is it better? And this is all about when you have a new idea and you have something different from the previous work, you would like to talk about how your idea is not just different from previous papers, but also offers better results than previous papers. So you want to show how your solution is indeed better than previous work, such as probably stronger theoretical properties or better experimental results. So these are some of the things that you would like to think about when you actually write about how your solution is better. So a lot of the papers, a lot of students, when they write papers, they focus more on originality. They talk about my original contributions. This is really, something that is new. But you cannot be just new. It cannot be just different from previous solutions. You have to be better as well. So you need to tell your readers how your solution is better than previous work. So 3 essential elements: the problem, what's new, and how is it better. So now let's move on to the second component of writing perfect papers, which is the hard work. So we need to really get started working hard on this paper. And what are the things that we need to do when we work hard on this paper? Well, there are 2 important things that you must do. You cannot just do one of these 2 important things. Both of these you will have to do. And what are these 2 important things that you must do? Well, obviously, reading and writing. So you need to read and you need to write. And you also need to read and write in a more of a interactive way. So you kind of read a little bit and you write a little bit, and then you go back and read something and you write a little bit more. That's something that we can actually call it an interactive way. So you cannot just read in a big batch and then 2 months later you start writing. So that's not an interactive way of doing this. So let's talk about both of these things. Let's get started from reading. Well, first of all, what is the objective of reading? Well, we need to become an expert on this particular problem we wish to solve. That's the objective. But the question is how? How do we become an expert in this particular area of research? Well, we wanted to start from a single paper. So which paper should we start from? Well, it depends. Perhaps it could be a highly cited very first paper in this area of research on this particular topic. Sometimes we call it a seminal paper. Maybe something that is sort of like a survey paper. Or maybe this is the most recent paper, the state of the art on this particular topic. Maybe this is a paper that you kind of randomly downloaded from the web by searching for this particular keyword. So just start from a particular paper and then try to do an expanded ring search. So this is very important. You need to do an expanded ring search from that single paper. So what do we mean by an expanded ring search. This is sort of like a breadth first search, a BFS. So you kind of expand gradually. How do we expand from that paper? Well, you're going to have to find papers that cited this paper. This is pretty easy to do. All you need to do is to do a search. You also need to actually try to find papers that this particular paper cited. And that's pretty easy to do. All you need to do is to go to the references and download each one of these papers that it cited. And you might want to go to the author list of this paper and find the papers that are written by exactly the same set of authors. And maybe you should try to go to the same conference and try to, just go for the papers that are in the same session. No matter what you do, don't depend on the search engine. Depending on the search engine and try to search for keywords, that will give you some random hits. It might be helpful when you get started, but it may not be very helpful because it's not exactly very comprehensive. So you may not be able to get all of the very important papers related to your particular problem. So you might say, that's too many. We have too many papers if we do something like this. Well, it's true. It's really too many when you actually try to go do an expanded ring search on this particular problem. So what you need to do would be two things. One is you need to narrow down on the actual problem that you wish to solve. So all you need to be proficient or be an expert on would be just one tiny slice of a particular research topic, just one problem. So that one problem, there may not be too many papers on that very single problem, very tiny little problem. So that's the first thing that you solve the problem of having too many papers. But the second possibility of solving the problem of having too many papers is that you need to read quickly. So you cannot spend many hours reading these papers. You have to spend a very small period of time. Especially if it's the first time you read this paper, just grab the paper and read it over a coffee. And that means that you're going to read it in 10 minutes, 20 minutes. You should not be spending more time than that to quickly scan through this paper. And then, of course, if you really like this paper, if this paper is really very closely related to what you wanted to do, then you can read more carefully if that is necessary. And when you read it more carefully, you can spend more time, of course, and that's okay because now, at this particular moment, you don't have too many papers that you have to read more carefully. So this is something that you really wanted to focus on. You're going to have to read a lot of papers, but also a very small number of papers. A lot of papers very quickly, but very small number of papers more carefully. And this is something that you can give you a lot of depth when you actually read a small number of papers carefully, and a lot of breadth in the sense that you will never miss a very important paper. But as I mentioned before, you cannot just read. You cannot just read for 2 months. You have to really try to have an interactive way between the two tasks, reading and writing. So let's talk about writing. So write. What do we write about? Well, write about what you have understood. Well, you might say, oh, I haven't read anything. I don't understand anything. Well, even if you have spent 10 minutes, 20 minutes, you spend some time. You spend quality time reading something. So you must have understood something. Write anyway. So you need to write early. You need to write every day. You can say, I'm going to write just 2 sentences. That's fine. That's writing. 2 sentences would be good enough. You have to write every day. You cannot just write later. You have to write very, very early. So some people say that writing a paper is, I have an idea, I do research on that idea, which is to look at the related work, reading papers and so on. And then 2 months later or 5 months later, I'm going to write my own paper. Well, that is wrong. So we really don't want to do that. We don't really want to have an idea, do the research, and write a paper, because really writing the paper itself is a part of doing research. So what we wanted to do is we want to do the reverse order. We want to have an idea, write a paper, and do research. And you might say, how do I do research after writing a paper? That's impossible. I have to do research first before I write. Well, that is indeed possible, because the writing process is the process of doing research. So you might say, how can that be? If I don't have an idea, what do I write about? There's nothing I can write about. Well, you write anyway. Write about related work. Well, that you can write because you have been reading papers, right? So you can write about what you have read. And write about what is challenging, what's really hard. You know, something's really hard. Probably related papers have not even solved completely. That's something that is, you know, like a new idea that you have in your mind when you're reading other people's paper. So you write about that. Write about what's challenging. Write about why the problem is indeed important. So you need to really try to think about that problem. Say, okay, maybe this problem is important and we wanted to write about it. You might say, oh, the other papers have already talked about it. Well, think about it yourself and write about why this problem is important without copy and pasting from the other papers. And going further, you know, you might be reading a few more papers and you might say, okay, they are not that good. The papers are really mediocre because there are many things that need to be fixed. And so that's something you can write about. You can write about what really needs to be fixed. So you can write a survey paper. Essentially, you're basically collecting all of the ideas. You put them all in a paper. So you've been writing a paragraph or 2 paragraphs a day, and you put them all together a week later or a month later. You have a paper. So that is a survey paper. That has nothing to do with original research. It's basically just summarizing existing papers. But that would be a paper that you can submit for publication. In fact, many people did, and a lot of these survey papers got very well cited. So we want to write as we read. So we want to write about what's new in the context of related work. And that would be something that goes back to our 3 essential elements. So when we're reading these related papers, and when we're writing about what's challenging, what's really something that needs to be fixed. And now we come to sort of like an original idea. What's really new? What can we do that is different or better than the existing papers? So now we have something a little bit more substantial to write about. So we have better ideas when we actually write about the more mundane ideas of what's challenging and what might be a problem that needs to be fixed. So that is the process of creating something new. If you don't write, if you only read, you will never, well, probably not never, you will, make it really hard to have something new. So creating ideas is something that interacts with the writing process very, very closely. So you want to write, because writing is the best way to force yourself to think very clearly and be focused on what you really wanted to do. If you don't write, if you read, well, I'm pretty sure you're gonna read for a few moments and then you're going to go, to your WeChat window or something else on social media, and you probably have something that you will worry about that is a little bit more interesting than what you're reading. But when you're writing, it will be different. When you're writing, you will be a little bit more focused because you need to really create when you're writing. When you're reading, you're just consuming things. So writing is the best way to force yourself to create, to think a little bit more clearly and be a little bit more focused. So that would be the writing process, and you need to really try to use the writing process to crystallize what you don't quite understand yet. And that crystallization is very important. You previously, have a vague idea if you don't write. You kind of, roughly speaking, what you know about, what you may be able to create. But when you start to write, you make it much clearer because you kind of try to crystallize it. You make it you put it down on paper. And that's something that is really much clearer. And writing has another very important benefit. Writing also opens a dialogue. A dialogue is something that really is important for the creative process, because a dialogue is a dialogue with someone else. So what you wanted to do is that you want to write for someone else to read what you have written. So this is something that's very important. If you don't write, nobody can read your mind. If you have written even just the 2 paragraphs, people can read what you wrote. And that would be very important to stimulate discussions with other people, because if you don't really have some kind of a common ground, some kind of a common understanding with the other people, there's nothing that you can discuss. You can discuss the weather, of course, but nothing else about this particular research topic. So this is actually why you kind of use writing to sort of bootstrap the process, bootstrap the discussions that you have with your colleagues, with your advisor, with anybody that you know very well, probably people working in the same area, or probably people that may not be working in the same area. So you want to write not only for yourself, but also for sort of opening up a dialogue. So you need to write for your readers. That's why even writing a paragraph or 2 paragraphs, it's going to be a slow and painful process. It's going to be very, very slow and very, very painful. It's kind of a creative process. You're creating something new. That's going to be slow. And in the past, when I was a grad student, I'm sitting in my office, and one of my office mates, who is a student in the same kind of research group, he had a very, very different writing style than me. When I was writing, I basically write the entire 5 paragraphs, and I will just call it the day in like 2 hours. When he's writing, he's actually writing 1 paragraph at a time. So he's writing 1 paragraph, and he's trying to change it and tweak it a little bit more, and try to write very, very slowly. But the difference between myself and his style is that when I write it quite quickly, I may go back and revise the 5 paragraphs in my work. But when he's writing, he writes this 1 paragraph, and he basically have it frozen after it's done. So it is, no matter what, it's going to be very, very slow. So he might be writing 1 paragraph for the entire evening. I write 5 paragraphs for the entire evening, but no matter what, it's not going to be a fast process. So you have to write for your readers. So that's why you need to write in a crystal clear way. And you want to write with a focus. You want to write with just 1 problem. What is that 1 problem you would like to solve? And what is that 1 potential solution that you have? And you want to write in a way that is very important and very kind of deliver the ideas to your readers. So you want to write with a flow of ideas that is easy to follow. This is something that is really something that you want to write to work for your readers. Your readers will have to be kept engaged throughout this entire paper when they're reading your paper. In other words, you're sort of writing very slowly, very painful process, so that your paper can be written to be easy to understand, to be as easy to understand as absolutely possible. Your readers don't have to work very hard to understand your paper. You write your paper slowly so that your readers can read it very, very quickly. So that's something that's very, very important when you actually try to work hard creating your paper. Again, we are talking about 2 important things. We're talking about reading and writing, and they have to interact. We are using the reading process and the writing process to create, and we're going to have to read and write every day in an interactive way. Once we have written some kind of a draft, we can submit a survey paper. We can also try to ask a colleague or advisor to actually try to read what we have written. The third component of writing perfect papers would be the art of writing perfect papers. So now we have put in the hard work. We have an idea. It might be quite a good idea, but how do I actually try to write the actual paper? This is not the survey paper anymore. This is the actual paper. So we want to pay attention to the title, to the abstract, to the introduction, and to the rest of the paper equally, the flow of ideas in the rest of the paper. Of course, papers, they are built differently. So different papers, they are completely different, which means that it's going to be very tough to talk about the rest of the paper, but there are something that we can talk about today, about the title, the abstract, the introduction, and in general, the flow of ideas in the rest of the paper. So let's try to think about these components of this paper. Let's get started from the title. Well, the title, it's just probably 1 line or 2 lines, but the title had a lot more readers. We had 10,000 readers. And the abstract might be 10 lines and then have 1,000 readers. The introduction might have 100 lines, but probably only 100 readers, an order of magnitude lower. And the rest of the paper might have 1,000 lines, but probably the entire world only had 10 people reading the rest of your paper. So your job is to write the title, the abstract, the introduction, so that you can get more people to read the rest of your paper, so that eventually they can follow your paper and probably cite your paper. So your paper had some value in it. So let's get started. Let's talk about the title first. So the title. What's a good title? What are the essential elements that make up a good title? Well, first of all, a good title will have to attract the reader to read the abstract. And it has to reflect, of course, the sense of the new idea. But there's something else in the good title. Maybe it should be as simple and as short as possible. In other words, we don't really have to put a precise summary of the paper into the title, and we don't really have to include all of the keywords in the title itself. So we want to keep it as simple and as short as possible, but probably not too short. It shouldn't be devoid of meaning, obviously. So we need to keep it simple, keep it short, but sort of still have like a nice punch, a nice meaning. Kind of give a nice sense of excitement. So the best title is one that is the easiest to understand at a glance. So I take a look at the title. I got the idea in the paper, roughly speaking. At a glance, I got to know the title. So let's say we have a new idea that uses new coding techniques to reduce the latency when delivering data over the internet. So that's our brand new paper. So that's a great idea. And how do we create a title for this particular paper? All right. So I have 3 titles. Which title is the best? So the first title, LLRC column. A low latency rate controlled system for fast data delivery over the internet. That's the first title. A good title. Second title, coded information distribution, new content delivery protocols for the internet. It's a good title as well. We're also using a column, which is a nice trendy way of having a title. And the third title, coding reduces latency over the internet. If you talk about the length, of course, the third one is a little bit shorter than the second, and the second one probably a little bit shorter than the first one. If you talk about the content, the first one a little bit more detailed. The first one, talk about low latency, for example. The second one doesn't talk about low latency, doesn't have the kind of detail. The third one talks about low latency, but it doesn't talk about the rate control system, for example. So, and the third one doesn't have the nice acronym that we have created, LLRC or something like that. Well, which one do you prefer? Well, I've seen in the chat window some people prefer 1, other people probably prefer the 2, and a few people prefer the third one as well. So, good. We have a nice distribution across all three possibilities. Well, first of all three titles are good titles. If they're not very good titles, probably I wouldn't put it on. But there indeed is a tiny little difference. I would personally prefer the third title. The third title really gives you a sense of what's going on. It is certainly a little bit more general. It doesn't talk about the specific idea that you have in your paper, but gives the general direction of what's going on here. In fact, there is a paper in 2019. It's in the Machine Learning Conference, ICLR, International Conference on Learning Representations. The paper's title is Local SGD Converges Fast and Communicates Little. And that actually gives sort of like the same structure as my third title, and it's a great title. Really, this is something I really enjoy. It's a good paper as well, but the title is great. You can say it's a perfect title. So here's another paper, another new paper on probably some ideas related to the wireless networks. Maybe I have a wireless spectrum market, and I have buyers and I have sellers, and the buyers and sellers, they're kind of matched in a nicely optimized fashion. So how do we actually have a title for that particular paper? So which paper is the best? Which title is the best? So the first one, maybe extended deferred acceptance. Well, a good idea, a good sort of name for my algorithm. Interference-free matching between spectrum buyers and sellers. Very good title, excellent title, in fact. Second one, stable matching for wireless spectrum markets. Kind of a shorter title, a little bit broader. It doesn't give me interference-free. It doesn't, have the name of the algorithm and so on. And the third one, spectrum matching. So now, which one is the best? Well, this one is a little tougher, I think. Well, the first example is pretty tough as well, because all three are pretty good titles. And if you really try to say, okay, the shorter the better, and of course the third one would be the best, but is it really true that the shorter the better? Maybe the second one that is in between the long title and the short title, maybe that is a little bit better. So I would still prefer either the second or the third title. The second one is a good title because it is short. It talks about the background, the context of the work, which is wireless spectrum markets, and it really also talks about the sort of the solution, the general category of the solution, which is stable matching. Now, it doesn't talk about the precise solution, but it's a general idea. The third one is a little risky in the sense that really it is extremely short and only 2 words, spectrum matching. It's very risky. Maybe it's devoid of meaning, and we don't want to have a title that is devoid of meaning, obviously. But on the other hand, it is also something that really attracts people's attention. So people will say, oh, what is that paper about? Spectrum matching, it doesn't say anything. In other words, it is a little mysterious about this particular title. So I have a co-authored paper, in fact, in 2016, actually titled Spectrum Matching. So it is a little bit risky, but I think it can work out because that paper had been accepted. So, it looks like the reviewers would not mind having such a short title, even though it is indeed a little bit risky. So, having short titles would be a little risky, but it's also a little mysterious and attracts people's attention. So it really gives me a little bit of an attraction so that the reader might be reading the abstract. So that gives us the opportunity to kind of transition into the second component, which is the abstract of the paper. So the abstract, let's talk about the abstract. The abstract is a very important tool to attract the reader to read the introduction. Obviously, the reader, when it starts to read the abstract, it's already attracted after reading the introduction. The title. So now it's your job to write the abstract so that the readers can start to read the introduction now. So again, the abstract, of course, it should convey essential elements about this particular paper. So what are the essential elements? Well, there are 3 essential elements. Remember, it would be the problem, what's new, the originality of your work, and how is your work better than the state of the art. So here's the typical structure of your abstract. We have one sentence that state the background. So that's something that is sort of to warm up the reader for the problem statement. And then we have one sentence to really become the problem statement. It states the problem, what the problem is. And then we have sort of a more in-depth introduction to the solution and the originality of the solution. So the solution would be sort of like a very high-level idea of the solution, and then what's new? What's new in that solution as compared to related work? So 2 to 4 sentences to state the original contributions and basic ideas of the solution. And then 1 sentence to state how the solution is better. Remember, that's the third element of our 3 elements in our paper, so we need to put that in the abstract as well. Maybe it's a stronger theoretical property. Maybe we have some simulations and show some better results. Show what the results might be, summarize the results so that we know how the solution is better than the previous papers. So here is an abstract from one of my own co-authored papers. I'm going to use this as our running example throughout this entire talk. So not only the abstract. So first of all, let me show you the title of this particular paper. The title is Aruta, column, Privacy Preserving Public Auditing for Shared Data in the Cloud. Aruta is one ring to rule them all. So that's sort of the acronym for one ring to rule them all, Aruta. So this is sort of like a more conventional title. It's not too long, but it's not too short either. It gives the essential elements of the paper. It's sort of a privacy preserving mechanism. It is about public auditing, and it's also about shared data in the cloud. So it turns out that this paper has the highest number of citations in all of the papers I have co-authored. And the number of citations is actually, quite high. It's actually, I think it's over 600 right now. It's actually something that didn't start that way. So when we actually get started writing this paper, the paper was not a perfect paper. So we're going to have to think about this paper and use it as a good example. So let's take a look at its abstract. Let's take a look at how the abstract is written. So because of the lack of time, I'm going to just show you the final draft of the abstract so that you know what it looks like right now. Of course, we have a first sentence, and that first sentence will have to show what the background is. So we're going to warm up the reader to the background. So in the first sentence, we say, with cloud storage services, it is commonplace for data to be not only stored in the cloud, but also shared across multiple users. However, public auditing for such shared data, while preserving both data and identity privacy, remains to be an open challenge. So that second sentence, turns out, is indeed the problem. So we're looking at what is an open challenge. Well, an open challenge consists of public auditing for shared data in the cloud, while preserving the privacy. So that would be the problem. And now let's talk about the contributions. So we have a few sentences here. The first sentence is an overview part of the contribution. In this paper, we propose the first privacy-preserving mechanism that allows public auditing on shared data stored in the cloud. So that's sort of like an overview. And then we go a little bit deeper. We say, in particular, so that's a nice transition, we exploit ring signatures to compute the metadata needed to verify the integrity of shared data. And then we have another sentence, with our mechanism, the identity of the signer of each data block is kept private from a third-party auditor, namely TPA, who is still able to publicly verify the integrity of shared data without retrieving the entire file. So that would be sort of more of a detailed illustration of the highlights of our contributions as compared to the previous papers. And finally, sort of like an additional feature. In addition, we utilize homomorphic max and homomorphic hash functions to mitigate the overhead of storing our signatures. And now, finally, we have a final sentence that basically talks about what's better than previous papers. It's going to be validation by experiments, so we're going to be talking about our experimental results. So our experimental results demonstrate the effectiveness and efficiency of our proposed mechanism when auditing shared data. So that would be the final sentence, talk about what's better than previous papers. So now, let's talk about the introduction. So we're going to spend a little bit more time here because it is indeed important. If your title and your abstract can get a reader to read the introduction, that's fantastic. You're halfway there. You're almost done getting the reader reading the entire paper. So all you need to do is to write a great introduction. So how do I write an impressive, a good introduction that impressed the reader with an exciting and clear introduction? The introduction is very important. It is so important that I rewrote the introduction in many of my papers. It is also very important because we wish our readers to understand our ideas, even if they only read the introduction and nothing else. So that's very important. We need to really try to get readers to understand our ideas. So we want to remember the three essential elements. We have the problem, what's new, and how is it better. So now, let's think about these three essential elements when we're writing the introduction. Of course, the introduction has to attract the reader, but also has to be self-contained, so that the reader that is short on time, that doesn't really have a lot of time, can actually understand what's going on in this entire paper without reading the rest of the paper. And it should be clear on what the problem is. That's the first essential element. It should also be very easy for the reader to understand why our solution is new, which is the second essential element, and how our solution is better than previous work, which is the third essential element. So now, what are the things that we should not do when we're writing a good introduction? Well, we should not make it too long. Again, this is because the reader doesn't have a whole lot of time. Maybe the reader is short on time. Maybe the reader only had 10 minutes. Reading your paper in Starbucks or in a crowded, train or somewhere that may not be the ideal environment of reading this paper. Don't spend too much space on the background and related work, because you certainly don't want to make the introduction too long. So if you spend too much space on the background related work, that's sort of boring to read. And of course, we have other sections. There could be a separate section called related work that we can put more on the related work. We can have another section on, for example, preliminaries. We can talk about more background if we wish. So don't put all of the details of the background related work into the introduction. Only put the essential elements of them in the introduction. And don't make your work sound more original than it really is. So this is very important. You don't want to boast about your contribution in your paper. Sure, it is better, but it's not miles better than previous papers. All right, so let's talk about the structure of our introduction. So you can have whatever structure as you wish, but you can also follow my typical structure. So here's the typical structure. We first have a paragraph that is sort of like warming up, that is an opening paragraph. This is typically a general overview of the research field, and it includes basic facts that are needed to warm up the reader and to prepare the reader for the next section, which is the problem statement, next paragraph. So it should not be too long, probably just one paragraph for sure, and probably just 2 to 3 sentences. That would be good enough. And for our public auditing paper, Aruda, here is the first paragraph that the student author at the time, well, of course, the student author right now had already become a professor, but that would be a student author at the time when the paper is written. He actually wrote the following paragraph for the first paragraph of the introduction. All right, let's read the very first draft. So this is not the published draft, this is the very first draft. Okay. Nowadays, data storage and sharing is one of the most popular service in cloud computing. For instance, a group of users can share and edit the same document simultaneously using Google Apps. Although the cloud can provide more reliable services than personal devices, the integrity of the cloud data still faces challenging security threats. Due to human errors, device failures, or internal/external attacks, the outsourced data on the cloud may easily lost or corrupted. Cite paper number 1. Another threat for the integrity of the cloud data is that the cloud service provider may delete rarely used data without informing users to save the storage space and reduce the commercial cost on those data. Cite paper number 1. So now, this is the first draft. So now let's find out all of the problems that we have in this particular paragraph. Let's find them out together. Well, first of all, if you look at that first draft, if you just now in the previous slide, you can easily have a gut feeling that this paragraph might be just simply a little bit too long. It contains many sentences, and the author is basically asking the reader to decipher the paragraph. In other words, the reader has to work pretty hard to understand what's going on. It's kind of working hard to understand this particular part of the paper. But the reader doesn't have to do that. We need to write very slowly so that we can actually fine-tune our paragraph so that the reader can actually spend the least amount of energy understanding the paper. And on top of that, the first 2 sentences, they actually are designed to try to warm up the reader with an overview, but the next 3 sentences actually tried to do something else. In fact, they actually tried to describe the problem. So that would be the problem statement. As I mentioned in my typical structure, the problem statement should be the next paragraph. So you should not put the background and the problem statement into exactly the same paragraph. That would be a little bit too confusing. So in this case, I would say that these 2 ideas, the background and the problem statement, should be separated into 2 different paragraphs. So the second paragraph would be the problem statement. So the second paragraph would be something that really tries to give the reviewer or the reader a clear description of the challenges to be addressed and also the problems to be solved. That would be the first essential element, the problem to be solved. And the second paragraph would be also something that is not very detailed. It's sort of like a general statement. It appeals to the intuition of the reader and describing the problem at a very high level. And it is okay to use an intuitive idea, probably as an example solution, and probably even a good idea to say, oh, that's a naive solution or an intuitive solution to this particular problem, just to help the reader to understand what that problem really is. All right, so that's the problem statement. So now let's try to get back to our example. So our second draft, well, first of all, we need to separate the first group of 2 sentences and the next group of 3 sentences into 2 different groups, 2 different paragraphs. So we need to divide them into 2 different paragraphs. But here, the 2 paragraphs, they look a little ugly. They're not really designed to be looking pretty. Why? Well, you can very quickly see without even reading them that the first paragraph is a little bit too short. The second one is a little bit too long, right? So the 2 paragraphs are not exactly balanced in their lengths. So the second paragraph is also pretty hard to understand what's going on there. So at this particular moment, we really need to work hard to rewrite both of these paragraphs. So let's try to first take a look at the very first paragraph to see what we can do to improve it further. So let's take a look at the first paragraph. First paragraph, again, we're just reprinting the first draft. Nowadays, data storage and sharing is one of the most popular service in cloud computing. For instance, a group of users can share and edit the same document simultaneously using Google Apps. So what might be the problem here? Well, first of all, we have what? Grammatical mistakes, right? So we have grammatical mistakes because really we have data storage and sharing, so that's plural, so that would be that's wrong. One of the most popular service should be most popular services, so that's wrong. For instance, a group of users should be a group of users, so that's wrong. So that, of course, we can correct after we proofread this particular paragraph. In fact, the best way to proofread this paragraph, in fact, is to read it out loud. So just now, when I read it out loud, I say, nowadays, data storage and sharing is, well, we start to find out these problems. They're not so hard to find out if we start to read them. But you cannot just read them silently. You cannot just read them in your gut. You have to read them out loud. And that means that you can easily find the grammatical mistakes when you start to read them out loud. You just don't feel that it's right. Then you find out what might be the problem. All right, so now we have the grammatical mistakes. So there are more problems. First of all, what's cloud computing? Well, it's not perfectly self-contained. You might say, well, everybody knows what cloud computing is. You don't have to explain this. Well, we're talking about 2013 when this paper was written. At that time, cloud computing was relatively new. That's first thing. Second thing, even if it's a terminology that is relatively popular, relatively well-known, it still wouldn't hurt to actually try to explain what that means. So there's another problem here. For instance, respect to what? For instance, nowadays, one of the most popular services in cloud computing, for instance, kind of a weird transition. So this is kind of a poor transition here. So in this particular case, we really wanted to try to make sure that we understand that we will have to rewrite this paragraph. So let me show you the first paragraph after my revision. All right, so the second draft, the first sentence. Cloud service providers manage an enterprise-class infrastructure that offers a scalable, secure, and reliable environment for the users at a much lower marginal cost due to the sharing nature of resources. That would be the first sentence, and that warms up to the terminology cloud computing. Not only that, it actually gives a little hint that the cloud computing is sort of designed for resource sharing. And we're talking about the sharing nature of resources, and that warms up the idea of sharing. Because later on, we're going to talk about sharing, because data sharing is something that makes our problem a little bit more challenging. So now we have, in the second sentence, a formal introduction to the idea of sharing. So now we say it is routine for the users to use cloud storage services to share data with others in the team, as data sharing becomes a standard feature in most cloud storage offerings, including Dropbox and Google Docs. So that would be the sharing, and it gives a nice application, Dropbox and Google Docs. These are the things that people are familiar with, and they say, okay, fine, data may be shared in the cloud. So that would be the second draft of the first paragraph, warming up the reader to the sharing nature and to the idea of cloud computing. So now let's take a look at the next two paragraphs that the student wrote, which also contains the problem statement after detaching the original first paragraph. So the second paragraph, which we have read just now, basically is the first draft of the second paragraph. That would be the problem statement. And the third paragraph, which is the third paragraph in the second draft, would be something that actually goes a little bit deeper into the problem statement. So the student wrote, to protect the integrity of cloud data, an efficient method is to enable public auditing by introducing a third-party auditor, TPA. This public auditor should have more powerful communication abilities than regular users and is able to offer security services to cloud users. So that would be the sort of the third paragraph and cite paper number 1. So what might be the problem with this draft? Well, first of all, both of these are somewhat related to the challenges of storing data in the cloud. But sort of the problem is not that obvious to the reader. So you're going to have to work very hard as a reader to understand what that problem is. The intuitive idea of the problem is that really it's not that hard. The intuitive idea is quite easy to understand. Is actually data stored in the cloud may be lost or may be corrupted, may have some errors, and the users don't know about it. So now we need to introduce a third-party auditor, and that third-party auditor can be used to check the integrity of the data on behalf of the users. So that would be the kind of the idea that you wanted to express in the problem statement. Well, what the student wrote at the time was to ask a reader to do the hard work, to decipher the writing. It's not that bad. You can still decipher it, but it's just hard work. The reader will have to do a lot of hard work and get the idea. So the problem with his writing was that he tried to mix the basic idea with some of the unnecessary detail. So they're not taking like a high level, like a 30,000 feet bird's eye view of what the actual idea of that problem statement is. It tries to mix the basic idea with the unnecessary detail. So now, let's take a look at this. Well, first sentence, although the cloud can provide more reliable services than personal devices, do you really need this? Well, probably not. This is a redundant sentence. We don't really need this to understand the problem. So we need to get rid of this redundant sentence. And then there are 3 citations to exactly the same paper. Cite paper 1, cite paper 1, cite paper 1. Is that paper that important that we have to cite it 3 times? Well, probably not. And we have a lot of unnecessary detail. You kind of talk about human errors, device failures, or internal, external attacks. You have talked about another threat for the integrity of the data is that the service provider might delete some of the data without informing users, save the storage space, and reduce the commercial cost of those data. That would be completely unnecessary. We don't really need to talk to the reviewer about that. So why can't we just describe the basic high-level idea of the problem without talking about the details? Can we just talk about it intuitively, the existing solution intuitively, so that we don't make it so hard to read? So the unnecessary details, they inhibit the natural and brisk flow of the main ideas. In other words, if you try to serve the reviewer or the reader too much, the reviewer will not be able to understand anything. So the reviewer will understand even less if you serve them too much. So now, let me show you the second paragraph that I wrote. Well, the second draft. The first sentence, the integrity of data in cloud storage, however, is subject to skepticism and scrutiny. So that would be something that really just tried to highlight the problem, which is the integrity of data. And we try to reduce the unnecessary detail. We only mentioned 2 of the several reasons of lost data. We talk about hardware failures and human error. Are there other ways of losing data or corrupting data? Sure. There are many other ways, but we don't have to talk about them. And then we cite paper number 1 just once. And then we have a smooth transition to the typical solution, which is the third-party auditor. So we say, to protect the integrity of cloud data. The integrity of cloud data is important, and it might be violated. We may not have integrity because of hardware failures and so on. And to protect it, it is best to perform public auditing. So we have this smooth transition. So now let's take a look at the new first and second paragraphs in the second draft. After the revision, so we have the first paragraph, we have the second paragraph, we have already shown them, and it looks like now we have 2 paragraphs and they're about the same length. And now we have both our warming up paragraph for the background, and we also have our problem statement paragraph that talks about high-level ideas of that problem very, very intuitively. So you might say, oh, that's hard. That's really hard. Well, yes, that's true. This is really hard to do. That's why writing these paragraphs take time. That's why it takes like 1 evening to write 2 paragraphs or 1 evening to write just 1 paragraph. It takes time to do. But remember, we only went through just the first 2 paragraphs in the introduction. We have a lot more in the introduction. But with just first two paragraphs as an example, you can easily see that just a little bit of difference will make a big difference. So the gap between an excellent paper, an excellent writing, and a mediocre paper with mediocre writing will be probably only a few words here and there with a better transition here, better way of dividing paragraphs, just a little bit. The previous version, the first draft the student wrote, if we fix the grammatic mistakes, they might not be so bad. It might be okay, but they're just mediocre. we can actually make it better. So that's something we can actually do if we put more time into it. So now let's return to the typical structure of the introduction. Well, we talked about the opening paragraph. Of course, we have a general overview of opening the paper, warm up the reader to the background. We talked about the problem statement, the challenge and the existing solutions, a very intuitive idea of the existing solutions, probably one paragraph or probably two paragraphs. And then we need to go into what might be the problems of the existing solution, what might be the limitations of these solutions that motivate our own paper. So our own paper would be designed to fix these limitations. That would be probably 2 paragraphs, probably 3 paragraphs. If you have a short paragraph, that's fine. 1 paragraph would be okay, having these limitations. And then, of course, we need to talk about a high-level idea. No details, just the high-level idea of our own proposed solution. So that will be the main idea, 1 to 2 paragraphs. So now, let's try to talk about what's new. So now we're finally reaching the point in our introduction to talk about the second element, what's new. So when we talk about what's new, we need to talk about originality. So we might say, what are the originality of this particular paper? What might be the original highlights of the proposed solution? We don't want to have a lot of paragraphs, probably just 1 or 2 paragraphs. You might want to talk about why is the proposed solution different from the previous work, and why is it better than the previous work. You might want to talk about 1 or probably at most 2, the most impressive highlights. Because if you talk about all of them, each one of these will be very, very brief, and that may not be able to deliver the idea to the reader. So you don't want to serve your reader a big meal, you want to serve them just a little dessert of what's going on in the rest of your paper, the most impressive highlights. And then you want to sort of write your part of the regionality part of your introduction so that it's crystal clear and it actually really stands out. And you might want to use the sentence, highlights of our original contribution in this paper are as follows, first, second, or finally. But a lot of people, they prefer to use bullets. They say, okay, bullet number 1, bullet number 2, or just bullets themselves, just like a PowerPoint slide. I'm not a big fan of using bullets, because using bullets, you don't really have nice transition through this flow of ideas. So we want to have this kind of a paragraph so that we have a nice transition. If you really want to separate first, second, and third, you still put them into the paragraph. That's just my personal preference. So you have this list of original contributions, and that list is going to drive the entire paper. The rest of the paper is going to be written to substantiate the claims that you have made. So that's something that you wanted to do for the rest of the paper. And after reading this portion of the introduction, your reader should think, hey, if they can really deliver this, that's going to be very exciting. I better read the rest of the paper. That's going to be great. So that will be doing its job as an introduction. The introduction should really attract the reader, give the reader sort of like a self-contained high-level idea of what's going on in the paper, and attract the reader to read the rest of the paper. So it's a good idea to include probably a table to compare important properties of the proposed solution with the direct competitors, the closely related work in the existing literature, because that's something that's very clear. It highlights your advantages. It might also be sort of a good idea to use an example. And because your example is going to show how your main idea works. And as an example, it shows how the main idea works in the special case. So that's something that's very important. And that's probably something you can put into your introduction. And of course, your examples should not be limited to only the introduction. You should use even more examples so that you can actually continue with those examples throughout the entire paper. Examples will be something that can help the reader to understand the rest of your paper. So you might call them toy examples because they're just simple examples in a very special case. And you can have an example after each theorem is proved, after each algorithm is shown. You can use that example to explain the implications of the theorem or explain the intuition behind that algorithm. But no matter what, try to use very simple examples. Don't use a very complex example with tons of figures and tons of kind of numbers in the example. Something simple would be really good. So your examples need to be really simple. All right, so now we wanted to really try to use these examples to help the reader to understand your solution well. And this is something that can be very helpful, and it can be even more helpful if you can actually design your examples to use some well-designed figures. It'll be a great idea to include a well-designed figure for every single example, starting from the introduction to illustrate your example. And by talking about a well-designed figure, that figure should not be too complex, shouldn't be so hard to understand. It should kind of accompany the example in the main text very nicely. And then, of course, since you have more examples going forward, and for example, even more experimental results, include as many figures as you can throughout the entire papers. Readers typically enjoy reading papers with more figures. If you have only text, mathematical equations, mathematical derivations, proofs, theorems, it's going to be a little bit less enjoyable. The readers might be a little bit attracted more to those examples and figures. So try to use the figures to help your reader a little bit, to make the paper a little bit more enjoyable. Now let's talk about the flow of ideas. So just like the storyboard when making a movie, the flow of ideas needs to be carefully designed. And we really want to make sure that each paragraph contains one complete idea. And we want to make sure that we split the paragraph that contains more than one idea. And if we have very short paragraphs that cover the same idea, we should merge them. Once we made sure that each paragraph contains one complete idea, now we need to pay attention to how these different ideas for different paragraphs, they flow to the next paragraph, flow from one idea to the other. So that will be the flow of ideas that we have. There are a few examples. For example, how do we decide where is the related work? Where's the related work section? Well, some people might say probably put it after the introduction. So if that's the case, then they prefer to use the related work to warm up the reader. That's fine. That's the rationale. Or some people might prefer to place the related work before the conclusion. And the rationale behind that would be after the introduction, the readers may not understand the details, the technical details of the main ideas. There's no point in talking about the differences from related work and why it's better than related work. So that would be something that is probably better after the main ideas are introduced. But no matter what, you can put your related work however you wish. You can put it right after the introduction or right before the conclusion. No matter where you put them, it depends on your design of the flow of ideas. So this is your storyboard. It actually tries to help the reader. So it really depends on the design of your flow. The next example would be, where do you write about the experimental results? Well, you could put them however you wish, but most papers in the literature, they collect all of the results and put them at the end of the paper. And that's okay, that's fine, that's their flow of ideas, but you don't have to have that flow of ideas. You could have your own flow of ideas. As long as it's a well-designed flow, it's going to be good. So you could actually have some negative or preliminary experimental results saying that this intuitive idea may not be working. And these experimental results might be very important for motivating the main idea that is coming up next in the paper. So that's something that might be good. Then you show your results first. And your flow of ideas in this case would be initial results and the idea to improve, some kind of intuitive high-level ideas to improve, and then you kind of go deeper into those ideas, develop your algorithm, develop your theorems, and then you have more substantial experimental results to show that your new idea is going to perform better than the old idea. So you can even interleave experimental results with descriptions of your idea if they provide the best flow. So that's something that is up to you. It's up to you to design this. And the flow of ideas is also about how do you allocate space across sections. Well, The short answer is no one knows it better than you because it depends on the flow of ideas. Well, we could have some general rules of thumb. We could actually write a very long abstract. We could, but we don't want to. So we want to write an abstract, typically some conference said no more than 200 words or no more than 150 words. That's something that we would like to adhere to. So probably the general rule of thumb is don't write a very long abstract, unless you have a very specific reason that you want to write a very long abstract. So typically, the introduction would be 1 page. And don't write a very long introduction as well, because it might be a little bit boring, time-consuming for the reader to read. Related work, it's up to you. It's up to your flow of ideas. Allocation of space is entirely up to your flow of ideas. And it could be half a page, for example. Concluding remarks, probably 1 to 2 paragraphs. Again, it's up to you, but here are some general rules of thumb. So throughout this entire paper, make it self-contained, but don't use a lot of space for unnecessary background. And keep the motivation short and concise. So that's something that you want to pay attention to. And now we have concluded our discussion of the art of writing perfect papers. We're talking about the title, the abstract, the introduction, and also the flow of ideas throughout the rest of the paper. So now let's dig into the detail. What might be the details that we need to pay attention to? Well, first of all, use a Git repository to manage your workflow. Why? Well, because the Git repositories will be helping you a lot to track all of the historical changes, even if you were to write your paper just by yourself with no collaborators. If you have collaborators, your collaborators can also look at these histories, and collaborators can commit their changes to the Git repository. You want to put everything, including your paper itself, the source code of the paper, and the references of your paper into your Git repository. Your Git repository will be the only master repository that contains everything related to your paper. So that 10 years down the road, 10 years later, if you want to revisit your own paper, all you need to do is to go to the Git repository. You know not only the final version, you also actually have access to all of the previous historical versions throughout your entire journey of writing that paper. So use any of the public cloud services such as GitHub. For example, I'm using GitHub Desktop, so this is something I can be using, and that's something that you could be using as well. Second, eliminate typographical and grammatical mistakes. This is part of the details, the tiny little detail of writing perfect papers. First, eliminate all of the spelling mistakes by running your paper through a spell checker. Now, I would prefer to use a Unix command line 2, because a Unix command line 2 is going to be fast. It's going to really be very efficient in your workflow. All you need to do is run that command and quickly scan through all of the words in your paper. And that's not something that Microsoft Word can do. Microsoft Word does not have that kind of efficiency. So don't use Microsoft Word. Use a Unix command line 2. And then fix the grammatical and usage problems of your English by proofreading your paper. And proofreading helps you to fix the remaining spelling mistakes as well that the spell checker may not be able to catch. For example, for special terminologies, your domain of knowledge, or like some spelling mistakes such as instead of must, you wrote M-I-S-T. That's something that is also a valid word, and the spell checker may not be able to help you to get it out. So proofreading not only helps you to get rid of grammatical mistakes, but also helps you fix the remaining spelling mistakes. And now we have yourself. You cannot rely on someone else. And certainly you don't want to rely on the reviewers 5 months later on down the road to proofread for you. This is your own paper. You're going to have to spend the time proofreading. Third, you need to have transitional words, phrases, and sentences. So you need to really pay attention to these details. Use transitional words, phrases, and sentences. What are these transitional words? Well, we want to use them across the boundary of not only sentences, but also paragraphs and sections, from one paragraph to the next, one section to the next. These are very important to convey your flow of ideas. Your flow of ideas is well designed, so you want to convey that design to the readers so that the readers can follow your flow of ideas with ease, very easily. If you don't add these transitions, the reader will need to add them subconsciously in their mind. For example, if you have bullets, just like a PowerPoint slide, they will subconsciously start to think about next bullet, what's the relationship between the next one with the first one? They will think about it. And of course, in that case, you're asking your readers to do the hard work. You don't want to ask your readers to do the hard work. You want to do the hard work yourself, and so that your readers can have a very easy job reading your paper. So some of the examples of transitions. Connecting two halves of a sentence. You can have as, since, or else. You can have connecting two different sentences. However, in addition, further, nevertheless, fortunately, unfortunately, surprising, you can have even longer connections to make matters worse, to further exacerbate the problem. The bad news is, the good news is, the implications are twofold. It turns out that, as an example, to take a step further, all of that would be great. Transitions depends on your flow of ideas. And you can even have transitions across different paragraphs and sections. For example, it only remains to see. The simple answer to this question is, the only challenge that remains now is to address this particular challenge. We first present, we next evaluate, we are now ready to. All of that will be great transitions connecting paragraph and sections. Next, let's talk about using correct English. So we need to get started from simple stuff. Keep punctuation marks inside the closing quotation mark. So for example, when we say making it a shared secret key, that's from the Arruda paper, you can actually take a look at here. You have a quotation mark, double quote, closing double quote, and you have a full stop, a period. And move that period inside the closing quotation mark, because that's the convention in English, with some exceptions, but you don't have to worry about the exceptions. So that will be the very simple fix. And don't use very long sentences. If you use very long sentences, again, you're asking the reader to read and spend a lot of time understanding, deciphering that sentence, and that's no good. That's a lot of hard work. So don't use very long sentences. Divide long sentences into shorter sentences and use transitions across them. So a lot of people prefer to say, a comma, another comma, where, in which, who, so that, such that, although, and so on and so forth. That probably you want to avoid. And don't be too colloquial. So don't use words that are too informal and too sort of everyday spoken English. Like a lot of is a little bit more colloquial than a large number of. So a lot of is okay, but in terms of meaning, is not as precise as a large number of or a large quantity of. Instead of big, huge, use probably a substantial amount or a large, something a little bit less colloquial. Don't be too formal either. So don't use big words to show to the world that you have passed GRE with a very high mark with flying colors. So overly formal words and phrases, sometimes they feel sort of awkward. And again, the reviewer may not even know this word. So you're making the reviewer, giving them a hard time understanding your paper. So don't try to, say, we endeavor to ascertain that. Big words. We just say, we show that. It can be ascribed to, it's due to, thanks to something. That's good. And the overwhelming quantity of, that's a big word, an exceedingly large number of would be a good idea, probably a better, slightly less formal way of doing this. Don't use words that are too emotional. For example, let's go back to the Arruda paper. In the first draft, the student author said, an easy solution to solve the problem above is to share the private key of the original user with other group members as a group private key. However, it is like suicide. So here, you basically have the suicide, and that's sort of like an emotional word. So don't use these emotional words. Kill, crazy, happy, fantastic, marvelous, breathtaking. All of these are sort of like emotional words. And that's something that you can avoid having. Typical new students, where they actually have a problem with countable versus uncountable nouns. If a word is countable, you can use the plural form. But when you're using its plural form, try to remember a few, to use a few, a number of, or fewer instead of less bits. You try to use fewer bits. If it's not countable, do not try to invent its plural form. So performance is not countable, don't say performances. Advice is not countable, don't say advices. Equipment is not countable, don't say equipments. Information is not countable, don't say informations. So don't try to create the plural form if it's not in the English language, and use less or lower rather than fewer. The agreement of the verb with the subject is also a major problem with some of the newer students. For example, here, the figures above shows versus the figures above show, because figures is plural. These problems that lead to lower efficiency shows that, it should be show that because problems show. Its efficiency and energy savings are remarkable, and so is remarkable. It slows down reading, so your paper can be rejected just because of these problems. You want to watch out on some of the common words and phrases, because common words and phrases such as with, of, before, at, against, in, and on, these are very, very simple English words. However, it takes, I would say, almost a lifetime to master the usage of these common words. It's going to be very difficult. So try to master a large number of phrases. Short phrases in English is also pretty hard to do. It takes a long time to do that as well, probably almost a lifetime as well. So what do? For example, in other words, should I use in other words or in another word? Which one is the right phrase? It's kind of hard to say because, really, it's hard to master this. So my advice is to use the Oxford Dictionary of English. So there is a built-in dictionary in macOS, which is the Oxford Dictionary of English, and this is an excellent dictionary because it actually had lots of examples, example sentences and example phrases and so on. These example sentences are your big resource, your major resource for you to learn how to use these very small words, in, at, with, and so on. Because all you need to do is look up your word and say, should I put, let it follow with a with, or an in, or at, or whatever. Just read the example sentences in this dictionary. You might say, what about Windows? How can I use Windows to do this? Well, just get a Mac, and that's what you do. And phrases, you can actually look up phrases as well. For example, just our previous example, in other words or in another word, you just put in the actual phrase and you easily look up these phrases in the dictionary. And you can actually have the easy access to thesaurus, and thesaurus is something that you can actually easily look for similar words. For example, though, you can actually look at this dictionary and say, how do I say though in other words? There are tons of ways of saying this, despite the fact that, notwithstanding the fact that, notwithstanding that, for, all that, while, whilst, and so on. Granted that, and so on. All of that will be possible. So that will easily help you to, open up your mind a little bit. So articles as determiners, that's something that's very hard. The article A and N, the indefinite article, and the definite article, they're frequently used incorrectly by new students. So we have plural nouns. They're typically used without an article. The source node receives acknowledgments, not the acknowledgments. So that's something that we easily make mistakes because acknowledgments is plural, so probably we should use it without an article. The indefinite article is weaker than the definite article. If we say large portion of, we will say a large portion of rather than the large portion of. Just make it a little bit weaker if we use A and N. But there's no need for THE, the definite article, in section titles. So instead of saying the system model, we just need to say system model. These articles that can be tricky to use. And there are just way too many of them in a typical paper. So you need to pay attention when you proofread your own paper. So let's take a look at one example sentence. And that example sentence we can actually, it's an artificial sentence, a fake sentence, but it could be a sentence in our paper as well. So here's the sentence. The extent to which the users can effectively communicate with the service providers depend on the size of community. Well, what might be the problems here? Well, first of all, users, right? That's a plural noun, so probably the definite article is not needed. Service providers is also plural. It's a plural phrase. So probably we should not use the service providers. But if we don't use the service providers, it feels strange without it too. The extent to which the users can effectively communicate with service providers feels kind of strange without it as well. So here's the solution. It would be correct to use their as the determiner. So say with their service providers, because it's the user's service providers. It's not the service providers. So is this good enough? We say extent to which users can effectively communicate with their service providers depend on the size of community. Is that good enough? Well, if we proofread this even more, for example, if we read it out loud, we might be able to find even more problems here. For example, the extent, blah, 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 depend on the size of community. Well, the subject needs to agree with the verb. So you have to say depends on the size of community. Is that perfect? If we fix this grammatical mistake, is that perfect? Well, not really. We have this community here. So the noun community may also need a determiner in front of it. If you just say the size of community, probably not very good. So you might say on the size of a community. Well, that means the community in question, it's not really specific, right? It's not a specific community. So we should probably not an arbitrary one. It's actually a specific community. So we should not probably use a community. But it's really that specific? Probably not as well. Not really. So is it a very specific community? So can we just say the community on the size of the community? Well, that's kind of strange as well. So this is probably good enough, but it's even better if we kind of reinforce the idea of which community is being discussed. So we might want to say their community. So it's the size of their community. So that would be the user's community. That's something that we actually be a little bit more specific. It's not a community, like an arbitrary community. It's not the community. It is their community. That is better. So that would be a perfect sentence. So good news, if you actually spend more time, all you need to do is to spend time. Most English problems are not hard to fix, especially if you use my little trick of reading out aloud. It will just, pretty easy to fix all of these sentences if you actually try to do that for your own papers. Next, typeset your papers correctly and beautifully. You want to use LaTeX no matter how, no matter what. What happens, no matter what happens, no matter what other people tell you, you do need to spend some more time learning how to use LaTeX, for sure. It does have a learning curve, but the typesetting results are dramatically better. Well, you might disagree with me. You might say, oh, it's not dramatically better, it's just a little bit better, or it's not better at all. Well, let's take a look at an example. On the top, we have Microsoft Word. On the bottom, we have LaTeX. On Microsoft Word, F and I is not connected, so there's no ligature, which is like a feature of font, sort of typography design. And on the bottom, in LaTeX, we have nice, correct ligature. And not to mention the font difference, like on the top is Times New Roman, and the bottom is Times. So there's a dramatic difference to my eyes. But to you, it might be just a tiny little detail, but to my eyes, it's a dramatic difference. In fact, my mind does not even work efficiently when reading a paper that is typeset in Word, because I'm used to read papers that are typeset in LaTeX. And there are a lot of information that you can read about LaTeX on the web. There are just too many things that you can actually read, so there's no excuse not to go through that learning curve of learning LaTeX. Next, draw figures using a vector-based application. So image-based drawing applications, they produce images, obviously, and that becomes fuzzy when zoomed in on the reader's iPad. So the recommendation here is to use a vector-based application, for example, draw.io, which is diagrams.net, and this is something that you can actually download as a desktop version, and you can use it online as well. And here's the illustration of what's going on here. And as you can see, that it's a lot of nice panels, very well designed, with a nice toolbar, nice tabs on the right, and the extremely comprehensive features of making it a joy to write figures. And also, it is fully collaborative online. So this is something that I recommend. Next, proofread your bibliography and make it consistent. So this is something that's very important. because really try to typeset your bibliography perfectly is pretty easy to do, but you want to spend time doing it. First of all, use BibTeX to typeset your bibliography in your paper. And download BibTeX entries. You want to proofread them. You want to get them consistent. For example, you want to make sure that the style of abbreviating the journal names and the conference titles, they are the same throughout the bibliography. The way that you write your bibliography entries will be exactly consistent. If you have page numbers for journals, you have page numbers for all of the journal entries. If you have abbreviated your conference names the same way for the same conference throughout this entire bibliography. So try your best to find out the venue where the paper was published in, rather than directly citing some online resource such as archive.org. This will be a little bit harder to do. It takes a little bit of time, but it's a little bit more professional because now people know that it's a published paper rather than an unpublished manuscript. So that concludes my very first section on writing perfect papers. The story, the work, the art, and the details. But now, let's move on to writing good papers, but not really perfect ones because I wanted to make them fast. I want to spend a short period of time. Can I write a paper over a weekend? Probably not. I probably will have to write the paper over a few months, but still, I need to make sure that not only I want to write papers that are good, but I want to make them fast. So writing good papers is really hard, and that's why you're advised to write slowly in my first section. So you want to really write and read and write and read and painfully, slowly read and write and proofread your writing and so on. In the good old days, academics can take years to write one research paper, but now you don't have that luxury, unfortunately. We have archive.org today that actually puts a timestamp on each paper that you put in. So we have a publish or perish culture where the number of papers is actually an indication of your quality of your research. So sometimes you also need to graduate. So you have to tell me exactly how to write these papers as quickly as we can. So in other words, if other people, they're traveling at the speed of sound, can I be supersonic? Can I travel faster than the speed of sound? So let's take a look at graph. This graph on the x-axis is time. So towards the left, we have less time. Towards the right, we have more time. On the y-axis, we have the actual quality of papers. Towards the bottom, we have worthless papers. Towards the top, we have the best papers known to the world, seminal papers that create the entire topic. So typically, you have this curve, typically. If you spend very little time, the paper quality is going to be too low. It's going to be towards worthless papers. If you spend a whole lot of time, good old days, you spend a few years, you're going to spend a lot of time, and it's going to be very challenging. You may be able to publish seminal papers, for sure. But in general, we want to operate probably somewhere in between these two extremes. Probably somewhere here. I call it optimal, but it's not really optimal. It's really optimality subject to a constraint. And what is that constraint? Well, that constraint would be a timing constraint. So our timing constraint would be a deadline. And that deadline is something we're going to have to meet. What we need to do is we need to maximize the quality of our papers subject to that deadline constraint. So I'm going to quickly talk about 3 things today. And the very first is to know your deadline. And that's something that you're going to have to know because that's part of the constraint. You have to really meet that deadline. So what's the deadline? Well, the deadline is right here. That's something that we need to really try to say, here's the deadline. I'm going to have to operate, before the deadline. So at all times, we're going to always work towards a paper deadline. So that's our job. We're going to have to make sure that we have a deadline. Well, any deadline would be fine. Deadlines are all equal. So it doesn't matter what kind of deadline it is. You can have a conference deadline. You can have a deadline for a journal special issue. You can have a deadline that you set up yourself for submitting a journal paper. Whatever deadline. But you always work towards a deadline. So a deadline is something that is defined as you will have to make it, no matter what happens. If it rains or shines, it's sunny or rainy or windy, you're going to have to make the deadline. So, but how do I guarantee that we'll make my deadline? Well, first of all, you're going to have to set your deadline realistically. So you're going to have to admit that you're not able to write a paper over the weekend, of course, but certainly not in a month or two. Probably you can do it if you're really superstar. I cannot do it. Probably you're going to have to make a reasonable deadline. But on the other hand, if you actually have a deadline that is 6 months later, it also may not be something that carries a lot of weight. Because really, unless you're extremely disciplined, you will not care about that deadline. You're going to procrastinate and you're going to work towards the final month before the deadline. So I was, many years ago, I was a search committee, in working as a chair of the search committee. I was reading a reference letter, and there was an excellent candidate. A reference letter from a professor basically said that professor walks into the lab, the office building, at 10 p.m. on Friday night. And this student is the only student that the professor met. And basically, they had a nice conversation and basically said, oh, are you working towards a deadline? And both of them say, yeah, I'm working towards a deadline. And the professor said, my deadline is the weekend, over the weekend. And the student said, my deadline is 2 months later. So unless you're that disciplined so that you can work on a Friday night at 10 p.m., if you have a deadline 2 months later, human nature says that you're going to have a realistic deadline that is not too far away. Next, you're going to have to make it public knowledge. You're going to have to really make sure that you have public knowledge. And that's something you're going to have to tell as many people as you can when your deadline will be. Why? Why do you have to tell as many people as you can? Well, you're going to have to make it feel sort of like a public disgrace if you fail to meet the deadline. Otherwise, if only yourself knows the deadline, if you fail to meet the deadline, nobody cared. You don't care, nobody else knows, so nobody cared. So as a researcher, you sure would like to cast a good public reputation, a good public image. So you want to let other people see you as a responsible researcher, as a nice, junior, dependable researcher. So that's something that you're going to have to do. That's why if you publish your deadline, to tell everybody that my deadline is, 3 months later, and that's something that you might be able to work towards with a little bit more hard work. You work around the clock, to make sure that others who depend on you will have the peace of mind that the work will be done. And that's something that you, as long as you start to make your deadline public knowledge, you will actually try to do. Just so that you can have a nice professional image, a nice professional reputation. That's, again, human nature. And you want to make sure that all of the work is done by the deadline. So next, you have the need of allocating your time well. So you really want to allocate your time because your deadline is 3 months later. You want to really have a rough timeline to decide what you're going to do in between these 3 months, between right now and your deadline, at the very beginning. So you're going to assign deadlines to each milestone. You have small milestones in your deadline. And you can even use professional tools such as a Gantt chart or some kind of a project management tool. So whatever you wish to use, you can actually use that to plan your jobs, your milestones before you reach the deadline. And of course, sometimes your estimate may not be correct. You might want to revise your deadline along the way if that's necessary. But think seriously why you missed your milestone deadline. Is that something that because you planned less accurately, or is that something because you did not work very hard towards that particular milestone deadline? So no matter what, don't procrastinate and delay all of the work to the days before the deadline, before the actual deadline 3 months later. It might be feasible. If you're a superstar, you might be able to write that paper just before the deadline, but it will be very stressful. And no matter what you did, no matter what kind of a superstar you might be, it also degrades the quality of your work if you actually try to cram before the deadline. Next, don't follow, you want to lead. So you're the first author of the new paper, right? Of course you're the first author. If you're not the first author, you wouldn't care about your paper. Then, if you're the first author, you are the boss. You are the leader. And the person is you who cares most about your own paper. And of course, you also have some collaborators. You have a team. You need to start your team at the beginning of your project. You're the boss. You're going to start your team. Only invite people that you trust when building your team. Your collaborators will include your advisors, your so-called 老板, the bosses. Get them to work for you. And get them to commit their time helping you on your paper, meeting your milestone deadlines. Warm them up. Give them the tough work ahead of time. And try to give them more work along the way. And promise them some good, nice, exciting outcome, some kind of a sweet dessert at the end of the meal. Assign your collaborators, including your advisors, your bosses, to milestones so that they are your resources in the professional terminology in your project management, and remind them about their milestones very, very often. So don't just say, could you please read the introduction for me? You're going to have to say, could you please read the introduction for me by tomorrow night? So give them some kind of a milestone deadline so that they will do it for you. And of course, if they didn't do it by tomorrow night, you're going to remind them, could you do it by next Friday? Give them another deadline, but no matter what, you're going to force them to work for you. And if they forgot about your request, try to persist until they do. And if they don't, they continue to forget about your request, cancel their membership in your team, because you're the leader, you're the boss. If they consistently fail, they should be not in your team. And you should have sufficient leadership skills to lead your team. And you should have backup plans. If they fail to deliver by your deadline, your milestone deadlines will be rearranged so that you can still get the work done by the actual deadline of this paper. And third, and finally, choose a problem with the right size. Because you have a deadline, you are working towards a deadline. It has to be a feasible problem. It cannot be a problem that takes 2 years to finish. You have a deadline that's 3 months later. So you have to choose a problem that can be completed before the deadline, based on your gut feeling, based on your estimate. So you will have to make solid improvements over one paper, and one paper alone, because you really cannot simultaneously improve 5 papers within 2-3 months. You don't really have that kind of time. You don't have the luxury to improve them. So choose that paper that you wish to improve. What paper do you choose? Well, you have to choose a paper that you enjoy reading. Or even better, probably a paper that saves you a lot of time implementing, because this paper comes with source code. And if the source code is not on GitHub, you're going to have to ask the authors politely to say, do you have source code that I can actually use? If they don't have source code, you're going to have to say, well, I'm going to have to give an estimate. We'll estimate the amount of time to reproduce this particular work in that particular paper. No matter how much you enjoy reading that paper, if that paper takes a very long time, you're going to have to give up. Choose another paper, because it takes very long time to reproduce the work. You cannot compare with that paper in your experimental results. How can you finish your paper in 2-3 months? That's impossible, right? So that's something that you're going to have to think about at the beginning. When you choose your problem, you have to choose a problem with the right size. You're going to have to read the paper along with its source code. So that's something that's very important. The source code contains some of the secret elements, secret ingredients in the recipe of this particular paper. The source code also helps you to understand the paper completely and very, very deeply. The source code contains that secret element that actually gives you a complete and deep understanding. Only with that kind of understanding can you create something new. You're going to try to work with the source code. You're going to have to run it. You have to modify it. You're going to have to live with it. You're going to have to think about it. You're going to have to sleep with it. You're going to have to really do everything with that source code so that you can eventually realize what might be the drawbacks and what might be deficiencies of that particular paper. And then you can create something new quickly. Right? So that's how you actually create something new, because you now have the foundation, you have the source code. To do it, you will have to have a deadline. Without a deadline, there's no urge of creating something new quickly. You have to have a deadline in your timeline, in your milestone deadline, to create something new. And the deadline is going to force you to think long and hard about what might be the new things in that particular source code, in that particular paper that you wish to build upon and you wish to improve. So you need to revise the source code and do some kind of feasibility test for your idea. You have some preliminary idea. You kind of have to implement them in probably over a weekend and try to see how well does it work. Does it improve the performance? Probably in a special case, probably in the general case. What kind of cases will it improve? And all of these will be hard work, but that's something that is much easier work once you have the source code. So if its feasibility is promising, then you think about the theoretical properties. So when your experimental results come up positive, then you will say, oh, what might be the theory? Well, anything that is provably correct. So that's something that you might want to think about as well. And your little problem must fit into the scope of the conference that you will submit to as well. So once you finish that problem, it's too late to find the conference. You're going to have to think about that problem when you set the deadline, because the conference deadline is 3 months later. That is the conference you submit to. So when you find the problem that you wish to really try to solve, that problem has to fit into the scope of that conference. And that means that you can actually have a paper eventually that fits into the scope of the conference. And the objective, of course, is to get the paper accepted. That's something that you wish to really try to do. And there are many conferences that actually have their sort of flavor. They have their favored research topics. They could be something that you wish to work on. No matter what, choose a problem that might be fitting the scope, but even better, you might choose a problem that is sort of favored, sort of like a nice, trendy topic in that particular conference so that you can eventually get that paper accepted. So that is all I would like to talk about on writing good papers fast. Since I want to talk about writing good papers fast, I need to do it fast. So that's why we have a very short duration of talking about this particular segment. So we talked about knowing your deadline. You're going to have to set your deadline because that is your timing constraint. You're going to have to maximize your quality of your paper with your deadline. And you're going to have to lead your team. Play your leadership skills and try to really exercise them and try to build your team your way and try to push your team members to work hard for it. And finally, you have to choose a problem that fits the deadline, fits the conference the 3 months later, and it has the right size. So the good idea is to build upon just one paper. And believe it or not, that's it. That's all I have to say today. And I have this 2-hour talk, and I have it planned. And now, good luck with your papers, and I'd be happy to answer any of the questions. Thank you.